Good evening, everybody, and a warm welcome to Rushcliffe Borough Council's Community Scrutiny Group meeting. I would like to remind everyone that the meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. A recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the Council's YouTube channel. In addition, under local government's executive arrangements, meetings and access to information, regulations 2012, other people may film, record, post on social media or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. May I please remind councillors to please switch off your microphones when you're not speaking. Thank you, just with the cameras and everything and the focus. Just to let everybody know, tonight we are joined by three officers from the council. We've got Daryl Birch, Service Manager Neighbourhoods, Luke Colaluca, Streetwise Manager, and Derek Hayden, Community Development Manager. Welcome. First item, I'd like to move to the first item on tonight's agenda. Apologies for absence, which I believe there's two.
We have apologies from Councillor Ellis and Councillor Phillips, and substituting we have Councillor Wells and Councillor Matthews.
Thank you very much. Thank you, councillors, for substituting this evening. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any from councillors or Councillor Barney?
Don't know whether I need to declare this, but having just seen these sheets in front of us, Nottingham Energy Partnership is something with my county council hat on in my role adult social care public health that we funded, and I made the decision on supporting that funding.
Do we have any others? No. Right, go on to item 3 from the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of January 2024. Do we have any question or anything from those minutes? If you remember, we had the presentation from East Midlands Airport, and that was the substantive item on the agenda. Could I have a show of hands to accept those minutes, please? Thank you. I'll sign those after the meeting. Right, going on to item 4, carbon management plan update, and I believe that Derek's going to present to us on this subject. Over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. So I'm here today to present the updated activity for the carbon management plan progress update for 23-24. I've provided a substantive report and the action plan and a dashboard. So what I was proposing to do was to go through to cover most of the items contained within the report, within the body of the presentation, and then can take questions and comments as an outcome of that. So you want to go to the first slide, please? So just really a recap in terms of the slide and some of the language that's used for some of the newer members. So when we look at carbon emissions, we're looking at scopes 1, 2 and 3 emissions. Scope 1 being direct emissions from our own activity. Scope 2 in terms of indirect emissions from the electricity we use and other activity, and then scope 3 in terms of all the indirect emissions in terms of that supply chain and procurement and services for the carbon that's produced in creating and delivering the activities that we do. Very hard to fully quantify all scope 3, which is a majority of our emissions. So our task between now and 2030 is to do a huge piece of work in trying to identify the product life cycle and the journey that items that we use in our operation takes, so that we can offset and mitigate that. Next slide, please. So what I was asked to do was to provide a little bit more narrative regarding the dashboard, because there was a lot of information contained within and wasn't quite clear. So this is scope 1 and 2 emissions from the Borough Council's own operations. For this slide, the blue represents diesel and gas, and the green represents electricity. So it has scopes 1 and 2 together. So scope 1, 93%, and scope 2 is 3%. Next slide, please. And then this is scope 3. So you can see that scope 3 represents 78% of our emissions, giving us a cumulative total of just over, well, just under 6,000 tonnes, so 5,753. So that's when you add the 1,222 and the 4,531. So fuel and energy-related activities, scope 3 indirect. So in terms of getting gas out of the ground, shipping it in tankers across the world, providing it to be used for our activities. And just really a point to note on that to make it tangible, we are mainly burning gas in our leisure centres currently, but I will talk through later in the presentation how we're looking to move away from that with alternative renewable energies and some emerging things that are coming onto the market. Next slide, please. So finally, in terms of dashboards, this is our road to carbon neutral. So what we've mapped is from our just above 5,000 odd tonnes that we're doing, and that linear line that we need to be to reach carbon neutral by 2030 from our own operations, which is the council's committed target. As referred to in the report, you will see that we've dropped below the trend line in the previous 2 years, and we've slightly seen a rise above that trend line, so going in the wrong direction. And I provide in the substantive report some reasons for that, namely that the 3 primary drivers are, first, we are returning to more business as usual environments in a post-COVID world. So we saw the way that people work in, 2021, 2022, 23 is now starting to return to normal. So we're seeing increased energy usage, increased fuel consumption as such. Secondly, the insourcing of streetwise environmental that was outside of the organisation, and now it's come back with all its fleet and operation and activities is into that scope. And thirdly, we have opened Rushcliffe Oaks, which has an electric cremator. So the Borough Council has actually grown in terms of its assets and stock as well. The second slide shows us with offsetting included within the calculation. So what we have done, our senior environmental ecologist has calculated all the carbon that we sequester from our forests, woods, lakes, our no-mow sites, and given us a calculation for what that quantity, what that value is, to give us that trajectory. So starting off at that, this is what we emit. We've offsetted every piece of green space and everything that we do. So that's calculated in that figure, and that's what gives us our trend line to 2030. I will touch upon offsetting a little bit later on in the presentation, because we have calculated that we will need approximately 42 hectares of offsetting requirement for 2030 to meet our offsetting requirements. And it's likely that we will need some offsetting beyond 2030, because no matter what we do, we will always have some residual emissions just by the activity that we undertake. So we will need to offset that to be carbon neutral into the future, because it's not just 2030, it's continuing to be carbon neutral after that date. Next slide, please. And this is really just a recap of the activities in terms of the action plan. There are 90 odd now, and it just shows that we have not started 13 for one reason or another. We have 47 in progress, we've completed 7, and we've actually added an additional 23. The reason for that is when we like to capture when we started off at the first iteration, which is 67, and we like to track new activity that's generated by undertaking a project. Thank you. Next slide, please. So I just really wanted to recap on the central teams, because it can be slightly confusing. So we have made, as a Borough Council, a commitment to be carbon neutral as our business by 2030. That will involve the decarbonisation of our leisure stock, the decarbonisation of our built assets and community halls, our fleet decarbonisation, and our offsetting and scope 3, those really hard things in the supply chain. In addition to that, the Borough Council, when it reviewed its climate change strategy, we also made a commitment in line with national government and international commitments to be not carbon neutral as a local authority area by 2050. So not what we, so 2030, what we do as a business, our own operations, 2050 by a local authority area as a whole. And and that includes, you know, our partners within the parish councils, all our housing, transport, local businesses, and some of the stuff that we're doing. But I will, through the course of the presentation, I'll present you some information which speaks directly to our 2030, which is our primary focus at this point. But also, we are not neglecting the 2050 target, because there's a huge amount of grants and activity that we've done that feed into that journey as well. Next slide, please. So I really wanted to just illustrate a point. There are two graphs telling the same information, but I think it's really important people to understand in terms of borough-wide emissions. So transport makes up approximately 33% of our emissions. We have the A46, the A52 that go through Rushcliffe as an area. So transport makes up a large proportion. Agricultural and agricultural practices makes up about 10% of our emissions. Waste management and how we treat our waste is 1%. 20% for industrial, so the industrial operations within the borough and how they manufacture and make their activities. 3% from commercial, 9% from public sector. That's not Rushcliffe Borough Council, that is Rushcliffe Borough Council, NHS, all public sector bodies, Nottinghamshire County Council make up that 9%, and then 24% from domestic. So you in your home produce, you know, boiling a kettle, having poorly insulated homes, houses, generating electricity, that makes up 24%. So really you can see that the two key challenges as a district is transport and domestic. So really trying to focus on our housing stock and decarbonising our fleet and transport as an authority area. So I just wanted to just illustrate that as a borough. Thank you. So what I'm going to do is move on to give you some of the activity that we've done in the last 12 months and some of the really exciting projects. It's been a really, really busy time for us and challenging. So we've made some good progress, which continues. So there's a huge amount of acronyms across this area. So if I blind you with 3-letter acronyms, I've tried to explain them in the most cases. So we have produced heat decarbonisation plans completed for all our non-leisure stock, and we've been working with those leisure centres as well. PSDS stands for Public Sector Decarbonisation. It's a government fund, and there are various iterations of the grant fund. We have applied and been successful for a grant for Cochrane Leisure Centre to support the decarbonisation of that site. The two pictures illustrate some of those activities. So the first picture is a box, but it's an air source heat pump. So we're moving the gas boilers from Cochrane Leisure Centre as a part of that redevelopment. And in addition to that, so we've got a £1.2 million grant to decarbonise Cochrane, which has currently been developed. It's at its design stage, and we have a current live planning application for that decarbonisation. In addition, we have a swimming pool support fund award, currently embargoed, but we have got an additional fund, which I think is in the financial figures, but in terms of there will be a press release of that in due course when the embargo has been lifted. We've completed some work in Rushcliffe Country Park and looking at that catering provision and how can we can decarbonise that. We have completed some work for a combined heat and power study for this centre. I know it was built in 2016, but there's some new technologies to the market, and we've been doing a lot of energy mapping to see about how we can use renewable technologies on our on our leisure stock as well. So really a huge amount of work in relation to our property and assets. And we're in the final stage of a bidding round, which will hopefully be confirmed in the coming weeks regarding the decarbonisation of the Sir Julian Kahn Pavilion in West Park and Gamston Community Hall, both looking to replace those gas boilers with both air source heat pumps, not as big as that huge package plant that's going to Cochrane, because that's obviously heating a swimming pool, and also solar PV opportunities on the roof of those buildings as well. Next slide, please. The other significant area as well is fleet and transport. So we've been doing a lot of analytical work to really make sure that we map all our transport and emissions, and really trying to overlay that with our vehicle replacement programme. So it's not just a matter that we're going out and replacing all our fleet in one go. It has to be a measured approach between now and 2030, so that our vehicle replacement programme runs in line with our carbon management strategy, so that when we are replacing our vehicles, that they're most energy efficient. It's quite a challenging area because some of the technologies that we require to be carbon neutral are not in the marketplace yet. So hydrogen is really not there, and due to the rural nature of the borough, we have some challenges around the distances that we need to travel for our fleet vehicles. So that work has been completed. So we've got now an action plan for our vehicle replacement programme that is aligned with our carbon reduction strategy, so that by 2030 we'll know what residual emissions we'll have remaining, what new products will come to the market that we can transition to be carbon neutral, but also what offsetting will be required. And I give some examples. So we're looking at our small fleet for van electrification, because it's easier to do. It's very hard to put in. It's very hard to have an electric bin lorry. There are some on the market, but they're challenging. They're very heavy, and we haven't got enough hydrogen refueling points to be able to do that within the borough. And as I said, with the rural nature of the borough, the distances that they have to travel, it's more suitable for a built-up city environment in terms of electric bin fleet. So one of the big projects, which is due to happen in April, is we have agreed with Nottingham City Council to transfer from diesel to hydrogenated vegetable oil for our large clean fleet and we have a transition programme for our fleet and some of the streetwise vehicles between now and September, which will look to reduce our emissions by 90%. We had hoped to do that earlier in this year, but I think we have been affected by some of the challenges that the City Council has faced with Section 114 notices and getting those agreements in place. So it's slightly later than we would have hoped. And that will reduce by 904 carbon tonnes of emissions by changing to HVO. And then we're exploring the electrification of some of our smaller streetwise vehicles, so the smaller panel vans that they use in terms of their maintenance, because they have quite a wide-ranging fleet. We are looking for the rollout of private funded EV points, so we're working with a company called Zest Energy. You'll know that we've been, in previous presentations, we've been very successful with our public car parks, with getting BP Pulse to provide EV charging points, and at a lot of our parks, public car parks that are linked to our transport infrastructure. This Zest programme is a private sector initiative led that are looking to how we can fill in those gaps. So we're looking at potentially Cochrane Leisure Centre as an opportunity to look at EV charging points there, because it's not close to one of the A roads, but it would provide an EV charging point within that area as well. So that's something we're exploring as well. And then it's taken some time, and this is it kind of shows the challenges that we faced. We had agreed last year to electrify and replace the 2 diesel buggies that are at Rushcliffe Country Park, because we want to be that site to be a flagship site for carbon neutral. so that everything as it's a carbon neutral site. And unfortunately, we've ordered, and these have been orders been placed last September, and it's the backlog and it's the requirement for people wanting them. It's challenges in logistics in getting the fuel cells to the UK and civil unrest and things coming on large container ferries to be able to get here. So I'm very hopeful that in the coming weeks you'll see some shots of the buggies within the country park being electric. Next slide, please. So we're doing a lot of work on contracts and procurement. We have written some policies into our procurement strategy, asking questions of about the supply chain and specific questions about the consideration of carbon and everything that's purchased. We're looking at low carbon and how that supply chain is mitigated. Biodiversity net gain has now been introduced as of the 12th of February, and we have employed a new biodiversity assistant with our senior ecologist. We've obviously got single-use plastics already in place, but really trying to work on that. We are working with our partners like E.ON and Lex and our other energies about ISO 14001. So we're trying to work with our partners who have got those environmental accreditations and doing that. We're certified for the British Growth of Trees and Tree Planting Scheme. One just small area that I've highlighted is the picture in terms of it looks like a lake. It's actually Gresham Swale. So we've been doing a lot of work at Gresham Sports Park on Wilford Lane, and we wanted to increase that in terms of as a habitat and increases biodiversity. Though we've taken out a huge amount of soil from that area to improve that, but it's been particularly wet over this winter period, and with Storm Babbitt and the flooding, it's really assisted, because we took about 350 cubic tons of soil and removed them off site to increase the water capacity and provide biodiversity enhancement on that site. And you can see that it's worked really well. So and really the point I'm trying to make is in the climate in terms of the amount of rain that's fallen, because we're experiencing hotter, wetter winters. We're going to have to do more in terms of climate adaptation work as well. So it's just a good example of how some of the practical things we've done and some of the climate adaptation stuff that will be required to do in future years. Next slide, please. So again, some policy and regulation stuff. We've rewritten our climate change strategy. We've included the biodiversity and climate change recognitions within that work. You'll be aware that we've got an ongoing review of our air quality strategy taking place. We've embedded carbon reduction in all our decision making and sourcing. We've set up a big business carbon club, and we've got that political leadership and support, and we're looking to how we can change the remit of our growth boards to make sure that they include carbon reduction in that work as well. And this has all been recognised in the peer review in terms of the work that we've done to date. Next slide, please. Again, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Daryl, because he can much better speak to this, but there's been a huge amount of policy change within the Environment Acts and the implementation of that up to 2026. It's been a very movable feast, and we've been waiting for quite some time in terms of government direction, what shape that will take, and it's ever evolving. But I'll ask Daryl to speak to those slides, if that's okay.
Useful. Thanks, Derek. Yeah, just very quickly. So Derek's correct. Not only are we looking at our fleets, but we're also looking potentially at how we collect waste. And there's going to be some big national changes, which is going to affect not just Rushcliffe, but it's going to be national. That will hopefully lead us to review the efficiency of our collection rounds and how our rounds operate. So to a certain extent, for the last few years, as Derek said, we've been in a bit of a holding pattern, waiting for national guidance to come through so we know what we're going to be doing. We've had a lot more detail come out over the last couple of months So you can see on there, Derek mentions, for instance, food waste. So it's highly likely that we will be introducing weekly food waste collections in the borough. That's going to be happening nationally as well. Unlikely to happen probably till 2027 at the moment, but it will be happening. It's highly likely that we will be moving to a form of curbside glass collecting from each household, because legislation is going to tell us we need to be doing that by April 2026. And we're also looking at what the government are going to be sort of putting out as part of their smarter recycling initiative, which basically means, again, we will be required to pick up other items that currently go in the blue bin or can't go in the blue bin, such as different types of plastic, food trays, etc. We are working across Nottinghamshire, trying to do this as jointly and take a whole system approach as best we can. So yeah, a lot of changes, which ultimately will see potentially more vehicles out on the streets picking up waste. So we just need to make sure that we've got the most efficient vehicles, but also the most efficient collection rounds as well.
Thank you, Darryl. So some of the operational activities we're looking at are the picture in the top right hand corner is our data. Well, it's a picture of a data center. Ours is not that large, but we're looking at our data center and how we use that. We've undertaken staff travel surveys in terms of how people get to work and how they're commuting. We have changed our electricity supply is now from renewable sources, so it's called a REGO tariff. So it's the Renewable Energy Guarantee of Origin. So it's coming from renewable energy. Again, Ed is working with Luke in terms of exploring opportunities for electrification points at Bingham Depot. And we have, we're working on, when we're doing the HVO on the bin lorries and on the electric buggies, it will carry all the Carbon Clever branding and talking about being carbon neutral as well. So we're really pushing that brand. And every time we do one of these projects, we're clear about the branding. Next slide, please. So Ed, who is our team manager for environment, has been working heavily with our parish councils and supporting them with asset energy audits. He's also been supported by Orcan, Rural Community Action Nottingham, and they've been doing some work about energy because a particular concern of parish and town councils and the smaller ones particularly is village halls and how they are heated and how they're funded. He's been working directly with Bunny Parish Council as a part of his D2N2 work in the Home Energy Action Team event, and that's where Bunny are specifically looking at how they can look at decarbonising the parish area as well. So we've been working with NEP and the D2N2 on that as well, looking at the combined authority and how this will work. We are doing a lot of work in terms of the combined authority, in terms of levering funding when that is established after May, and how we can lever more direct investment into Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire and work collaboratively together. And that is the UK Fast Follower scheme, promoting energy efficiency education for household, the Big Rural Business Carbon Club. Ed has been supporting some small to medium-sized businesses who have asked for support in terms of their energy audit, and we've been supporting bids for the Share Prosperity Funds and landfill tax and that. And it's just some examples of that. Next slide, please. As I'd mentioned previously, we have done the carbon sequestration report has been completed for the borough area. And we have calculated the offset residual emissions from our own operations. We've identified, you'll see on the map in terms of the squiggles, is our biodiversity opportunity map. And so looking at areas where we would look to enhance biodiversity across the borough as a part of being a greener borough in terms of our emissions. And we're working with private sector housing in terms of BNG providers, so looking at areas where they could be receptor sites within the borough. So if people are looking, so if house builders are looking to offset from their emissions where those woodlands and that would be created. So we've got approximately 46 hectares required to meet our offsetting requirements. Next slide, please. And really just in terms of the 2050 target, so I've spoken a lot about the 2030 target, but in terms of the 2050 target, we have delivered a huge amount of projects at Hub 3 and LAD 3 and Hub 2. So LAD stands for Local Authority Delivery Scheme and Hub stands for Home Upgrade Grant. We have levered in a huge amount of money focusing on solid wall insulation, air source heat pumps, solar panels and loft top-ups and room conversions. There's quite a lot of funding that we've done. We've been working with E.ON on that. We're also working with off-gas properties, so particularly those ones in rural areas. So we have fitted air source heat pumps, external wall insulation, 2 loft top-ups and seven solar electricity supplies. They are particularly difficult houses to cater for because they're not on mains gas supply, so they may be getting their energy by LPG or oil in terms of heating those homes, so particularly difficult to treat. What I have done is I have provided 2 handouts to really bring that to life, of 2 case studies. One from Shelford and one from Eastleek, and it tells you about some people that have benefited from those schemes, just for information. We're working with Metropolitan Thames Valley Housing, because you saw in the earlier slide where we're talking about domestic housing and how they can decarbonise the social housing market within the borough. And we're working to look at, in terms of a devolution fund for 36 measures, including more external wall insulation within Eastleek. There's some particularly needy housing stock within a particular area within Eastleek that we're targeting external wall insulation at. And we're also developing a county-wide solar electricity bulk purchasing scheme with the County Council and the Midlands Net Zero Energy Hub to look at how we'll deliver that as well. And last slide. We continue to do a lot of parish council outreach. We're supporting carbon reduction initiatives and investment. We continue with the Big Carbon Club, supporting SME audits, and Kath Maria, who's our chief executive, is the chair of the Nottinghamshire environmental group, providing that strategic leadership. And there's some pictures. The bottom right is some really interesting work that BGS are doing in Keyword, where they're having boreholes in the ground to provide geothermal energy, and are hoping to use that as an exemplar site for the borough. Very proactive. Obviously, it's right within their sphere of influence, but that might be look into future to be like a small localized district heating scheme. But really exciting work that they're doing as a trailblazer within the borough. So working with them on that. That's it. Thank you. So I'm happy to take any questions or any comments or any information that people may have.
Okay, thank you very much for that excellent report on and presentation. Councillor Pratt, yep, got your hand up first.
It's a quick question about the 46 hectares of site required for the, was it offsetting, carbon offsetting? Has that land been identified?
No, it's not. We have a cabinet report going to cabinet in April to set out the principles in which we would look to establish that. If that gets approved, we would be looking for sites to acquire to enable us to do that offsetting.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Barney.
Yeah, just to declare a late interest again, just because of my involvement, my employment with hydrogen and GeoPure in Rushcliffe. Brilliant. There's an awful lot going on, and encouraging every time you speak. I stand encouraged. I wish we could be doing this stuff quicker, and but just very encouraged that we are moving in the direction we are moving in. HVO and the work with the city on refuse lorries, brilliant. But we obviously need to be monitoring where that HVO is sourced from, because obviously HVO can have horrific carbon footprints, in some cases 9 times worse than using fossil fuels. So I'm sure that we will be doing that and ensuring that our sources are actually of carbon benefit as opposed to fossil fuel. The only other comment I wanted to make is that technologies are changing incredibly rapidly, and particularly in my sphere with working in hydrogen, we're seeing huge advancements very rapidly. So we should not tether ourselves too strongly to one technology now, because as economies of scales increase in all of these different areas, and we actually make the switch from fossil fuels at scale to using renewables at scale. As we've seen with wind, we see the costs come down enormously. And of course, wind for some time now has been by far the cheapest per kilowatt hour base generation. So carry on, let's go quicker, but let's also link what we're doing always to how much it costs and be transparent about that and what it's really costing us as an authority to deliver these savings. Not that we wouldn't want to be doing them, but we shouldn't be hiding those costs either. Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of your points, that question has been raised, and my colleague Darrell can confirm in terms of we've looked at the provenance of the HVO and how it's been sourced to ensure that it's coming, that it meets that criteria. You're absolutely right in terms of hydrogen, and HVO is not the answer because it has a carbon footprint, but it is a transition to ensure that we can transition from diesel, but it is a kind of a stepped approach onto those new technologies, because it's particularly challenging with our bin lorries because they're heavy, and either hydrogen or fuel cells in terms of electric. It's about having that infrastructure in place to be able to do that at scale, and I think it's ensuring that we have. Yes, I think that the important point is HVO can be used and doesn't have a detriment on the vehicles, so it can go back to diesel if it needed to be. So we're ensuring that we're transitioning. So it's not the answer, but it's a step in the right direction. In terms of finances, on the Appendix 2, I have enclosed, and within the financial comment, I've enclosed a full breakdown of the expenditure. And you can see within the £1 million that we've got allocated from our Climate Change Action Reserve, we have actually levered in over £6 million from external investment. So for that £1 million, we have levered in £6 million overall in terms of funding, which is a very positive step for making that financial commitment towards our carbon journey. That it's levering a lot of, and we've been quite fortunate with a lot of the grants, because we have that match funding available to us. It's allowed us to move at speed, and that's why we've been successful in getting in those grants, which we haven't necessarily have been successful in other areas in the past, because of the relative affluent nature of the borough in terms of its funding position. Thank you.
Councillor Mallender.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, thank you for a really good update. It's really glad to see that there's progress being made in this. Yeah, I'd like to see it go faster as well. I think we were going to say that, or we could have started 20 years ago, but you know. Just a few points to pick up on. Certainly, yeah, the thing about HVO, absolutely true. It is seen very much as a transitional technology there, and you know, and then the HGVs will be either electric or hydrogen, depending on use cases, I guess, is most likely for that. Talked about the various other types of waste recycling coming down the line at some point in the future. I did write waiting for the Messiah, because it feels like it's been a long time waiting for the guidance on this. But it did bring me back to a visit that some of us did a while ago. How much longer is there still to run on the PFI agreement with Veolia up there? And is that being factored into the discussion about what's going to work with that? I'll come back to next things, but I'll let you answer that one first.
Yeah, just on the PFI contract with Veolia and the County Council. I can't remember the exact date. I've got a feeling it's 2029, but I'll confirm that with you. We have a Notts-wide officer group that Veolia also come to, and the County Council come to. So we're trying to take a whole systems approach to this, rather than just, because there's an argument on some of the waste things, we could just say, well, let's just all chuck it in a bin and leave it for Veolia to sort. That's not necessarily the best way moving forward. and also potentially there could be some income coming to the council if, for instance, we started separating out paper and card, just as an example. So yeah, I'm not quite sure on the exact date of the PFI, but I will confirm it. But it's fair to say that we're trying to take a one system approach across the whole of Nottinghamshire.
Just to follow up to that one, would that feed into, would that discussion still continue to be at county and borough level, or would that sort of get fed up to a kind of a larger thing within the combined authority?
I think at the moment we are working just with the county. I mean, it's quite possible it would, but at the moment we're just working with the county. The county are key to this because they're currently, obviously, they're the disposal authority. So we could have a million and one things that we would like to collect and stuff like that, but if there's no sustainable sort of market for them through disposal, it would be pointless collecting them. But it's very clear that based on currently what we're being told, we are going to be legislated to collect quite a few different items that we can't currently put in the blue bin at the moment.
Okay, thank you. There's just a couple of other points I want to pick up on. The offsetting one was really interesting. I had the same question, which was in the report going to cabinet. I'll have a look at that one with interest. Did I hear you say correctly that the council will actually be buying sites for that?
To be determined, but that's one of the options. That will be, it will be looking to acquire that. That could take many forms in terms of partnership, purchase, long-term lease, in terms of the options that are available to us. And you know, that could take many shapes, but it's looking at about what we could do within the borough, because we've obviously mapped the areas that we would like to see. But it's a delicate balance in terms of land values, current agricultural uses, acquiring that land and how that will be done. But it's certainly something that is within our vision to look at how we're going to offset and have a strategy which allows us to offset to 2030 and then offset beyond, because we have to factor in some time for tree maturity. So when we're factoring, so we need to be starting about it, thinking about it now, because when you plant a tree, it takes about 5 years to get where it's taken in carbon. So there's an element where, and that has to go on for the next 100 years as well. So
I recognise the hook as one of the pictures that was up there for one reason, but that's fine.
But it's about trying to, and what we really need to think about is how we use our current assets and how we use our open spaces, and can we maximise these sites for tree planting, the use of grassland, and to ensure that how we manage them. And you know, if they were cut like amenity grassland, what's the offsetting potential? So we need to really map all of that work and how we deliver that across the borough, and then what are the opportunities out there to look at offsetting sites.
Thank you. And finally, there was a bit about education. So you had a bit about the big business club and parish council outreach and things like that. Have we got any plans to do more education to residents as well, around not only what's coming down the line with all this, but to let them know, but also around waste reduction? There's been work done when Councillor Sue Mallender was mayor with plastic-free communities in Cotgrave. We've done similar in Lady Bay. There's loads of opportunities to do for that elsewhere around the borough. You do still get the kind of mistaken view that some people have, that as long as they can get as much stuff as possible into the recycling bin, that's all they have to do. And we need to sort of educate people that it's much about waste reduction as anything else. I wonder what plans we might have still for that.
Yeah, so I've been speaking to Darrell upon this, and I think the Environmental Act and trying to wait and get clarity and trying to understand, because there's lots of various components in that in terms of bottle recycling, that, but it's one of the primary levers within that waste management strategy will be about waste reduction in terms of buying reusable products and that, and trying to educate residents. So with the new requirements that are going to be coming out over the next couple of years, there'll be a huge amount of education. I can remember the days when we were a Beacon Authority, and our waste and fleet colleagues used to come to Lark in the Park and be educating people with the different bins and what they were meant to be doing. So I can see a position in the future in the next few years where we'll be doing that. But a key strand for a carbon reduction perspective will be about waste reduction. So it doesn't go in doesn't, because you're almost at the point of at the end when you've reduced the waste. So how can we re-educate people to not create the waste in the first place?
Yeah, just thank you, Derek. Just on that as well, I'm 100% certain that once we have a clear idea of exactly what's happening and when, we will be doing road shows. We'll be going into towns and villages, similar to those that can remember when we rolled out wheel bins many years ago. So we'll be doing a lot of road shows. Reduce, reuse, recycle is still part of the waste strategy that we have in place. You're correct. You know, recycling is great, but if we can reduce the amount of waste, that's even better. If we can't reduce it, then great that we can recycle it. But yeah, we've done a lot of things on things like love food, hate waste, and stuff like that. Again, not wide. We generally do put stuff out. But yeah, things like Lark in the Park and stuff, we always try and get along to it where we can.
Thank you. Councillor Wells, you have your.
Thank you. You talked about solid insulation on homes. How many homes have you done, and what was the age of the properties?
Now you're testing me. We do have a full breakdown, but my colleague Ed, who's not here this evening, will have that. I can provide you a full breakdown. What we've been looking at, particularly within the BCIF homes within East Leak, to provide external wall insulation for those properties because they're particularly poorly insulated, and there's a lot of heat transfer. So I can provide you with a full breakdown of the housing and the measures that was done within that, because in some of the earlier iterations of the grants that were available, there had to be a measure mix. So it had to be some external walls, some loft insulation, some solar panels. But the most recent funding we received has removed that requirement, so we can do less houses but more measures to make them more energy efficient. So if it's okay, I'll provide that as a follow-up because I don't have the figures now.
Why I asked, because a lot of the houses in Rushcliffe are 1930s and they got no cavity wall.
Yeah.
I live in a 1930s house and I put solid insulation on the outside, and I managed to turn the boiler down by 3 degrees. So if we push that forward, we're going to cut it right down.
And there are a number of projects. So I live in a similar type property, and as I progressed around the house, I put internal wall insulation on the exterior wall. So what we're trying to do is to try and lever in as many grants for many schemes as possible. It is particularly challenging because of the character and the housing type. It's not appropriate in some areas and conservation areas to externally clad houses, and then it's about residents' receptiveness to, you know, if they've decorated their property and they like it, they're, you know, a little bit more resistant to do it. So there's constantly evolving grants that are becoming available, and what we are trying to do is to be really clever and try and target as many grants as we can. And that combined authority, we're working really well with NEP and collectively to try and lever in as much funding as possible for Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire to enable us to be able to.
Councillor Plant, you're next.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Derek, for the presentation. I mean, I found it really interesting. I mean, obviously, as a borough, we've made great strides since the 5 years when I was on the Borough Council since. So, well, that's really very heartening to hear. But I'm thinking, actually, Councillor Wells has actually spoken what I was going to raise. It is the fact that you said that, and we all know that, domestic housing is 24% of the sort of carbon emissions for the borough as a whole that we have to address. And you have just spoken about that because there's the hugs and the lads. But from my understanding of those, they are for obviously sort of low income households or households that haven't got gas or, you know, they're on oil or whatever. And it is also what Councillor Malander was saying. It's still this education thing, isn't it, of getting it out to people that, you know, it's going to make, we will have to take some responsibility here in terms of our homes and doing our bit. But I mean, we need also to be looking at all of these things eventually will become cheaper when everybody's obviously doing all these things more, but it's sort of giving residents that sort of one the information, to the education, and also some form of encouragement that actually, because years and years ago there used to be grants available that people could actually get for a home insulation, solar panels, all of that, and I can't understand why more of that is not coming online for the general public, because that's the way we have to go in order to reach that, you know, by 2050. But people need a lot more help and support with it, and education.
Yeah, absolutely. The domestic housing market, one of the biggest challenges is we can obviously improve the building control and the thermal efficiency of new properties coming onto the market. It is the existing properties that are already there and how we retrofit those properties to be as carbon neutral as possible. There's a number of projects at scale in terms of looking at the combined authority, in terms of the innovative UK fast followers, where we're looking at that education so that we can do it across on a regional basis, about how we can get schemes to promote that to householders, because that is when we look at the borough-wide emissions, and if you look at that for the whole of Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, there are the same challenges that people are facing, and we're also looking at the bulk buying of solar panel projects, so that where we could for domestic properties where people could get economies of scale, getting that a cheaper rate of procurement. So we're looking at large scale projects like that, because what you really need is alternative technologies and insulation, and that happening at a larger scale, so that you get it cheaper.
Of social housing in the borough, I mean, do we know what's happening with our main providers, and are they actually moving forward in along these lines?
Yes. So my energy, my environmental manager Ed has been working. So Metropolitan Housing is our largest housing provider, so they're currently working. I think I had it in one of the slides with them about their decarbonisation plan for their stock. There are a number of housing providers, so it's about identifying what their plans are and what grants, because there are grants becoming available from government for social housing providers, which they can look to decarbonise their stock in very much in the way that we have done audits on our leisure and our non-leisure stock, and our Cenex report for our decarbonisation of our fleet. They need to do the same for their properties that are within their asset portfolio, and how they are going to decarbonise them over time.
Councillor Thatcher.
Thank you, Chair. You spoke about towns and parish connecting for helping them decarbonise their assets. Do they contact you, or will you be contacting them initially?
So I believe there's an event coming up which are kind of organised in a couple of weeks, and Ed went and spoke to one a couple of weeks ago. But I will provide the details of our environment manager, is a gentleman called Edward Ledione, and he was happy to be contacted by the parishes, because he's given some standard advice, and then if they have a particularly question that they want, he's probably over helping, keen to go out and to be on the ground. So he'd be happy to help that. So we can reshare that information, because we provided a pack for parish councils, and we've done lots of work at the town and parish forums about energy reduction, because basically what the parishes need, if they want to progress this, is to have a carbon management plan like we've got, and understand what their emissions are, and then if they've got a community hall or a building, is to get a study done to understand how they're going to decarbonise that. So do they need to change the boiler? Do they need to insulate? Do they need to put solar panels on the roof? And how they're going to pay for that, and if there's grants available. Because usually when you've got that information, we can usually then try and find a grant that would support the parishes to be able to do that.
Thank you.
Councillor Billing, you're next on my list.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Fletcher's actually asked half of my question. That's great. Thank you. You mentioned sequestration to begin with, and talking about the assets that are already there.
Yeah.
How do you factor in the fact that an asset that's been there for eons against what we're going to need to be increasing over the next 20, 30, 50, 100 years? And you said you've identified 46 hectares. How long is that 46 hectares for in terms of annual sequestration?
Yeah. So our senior ecologist, a gentleman called Paul Phillips, has sequestered. So he's looks how many hectares we've got, what kind of management it currently is in, what it's done. So that's to give us the baseline. So that's the sequestration strategy for what we own and we operate. He's then also calculated what we are likely to need in terms of those unit values that will be created over that time. That 46 hectares is up to 2030. So we will need, yes, just to 2030, and then we will need to have some residual amounts. We'll need to think beyond 2030 for any carbon that we produce and how we're going to sequester. So it's likely that we'll need an equivalent amount for the next 20 odd years. So you will see, this is where it becomes a real challenge, is you will see that people, if they aren't managing to get the carbon that they're producing down, they will have to meet a commitment to be carbon neutral. They'll have to offset more. So it's a dual approach.
I've just got three questions. I'll start kind of with an easy one, and I don't know if it will be yourself, Derek, or Luke that might be able to answer this one. Is the all the tools and and strimmers and everything like that, are they all electric from Streetwise? And because with it not being petrol, but also then you haven't got the vibration nature that people could use them longer as well.
So I can start answering it and then you can add in anything. So so it's really interesting in terms of the small power tool market. We've been very lucky. We've got a fantastic friends group at Rushcliffe Country Park. Using their own funds, they've bought a lot of electric power tools as a replacement for what would have been, petrol generated. There are challenges within that in terms of the technology and how long they last for when they need to be recharged in the fuel cells. I think it is an aspiration for us, but it's trying to move with the market. I think the challenge for Streetwise is how do you do that transition over time? So whilst we've been using Rushcliffe Country Park as a bit of a pilot site in terms of some of the equipment and how we change that, because they're not doing it at an industrial scale in terms of the friends, but it has provided some really useful information in terms of some of the challenges that you face in terms of replacing those batteries if you're using them all day.
We've got a mixed bag of power tools, some electric and some still using petrol, and that's based on the length of time in use during operation. So, for example, the chewing gum removal machines that we were able to get last year, they're all three of them are fully electric, and we did have to buy additional batteries to make sure that they could last the duration that the staff needed them for. And it's something that we want to move forward with, but obviously we need to make sure that the operative isn't coming back to the depot after an hour or two to recharge the equipment accordingly.
Thank you. Also touched about the EV charging points in the car parks, and I know from previously when it was looked at with Central Avenue, there was a few challenges around there and obstacles and that, and likewise trying to get funding for some of the sites because of their nature. Has any of that kind of changed for us to try and get funding, because some of these are large car parks that would be benefit for residents to go, that if they're going into the centre of West Bridge, they're able to charge
Yeah, so one of the challenges with Central Avenue was electricity supply, and it was at capacity. So in the last 18 months, there's been a significant substation that has been put on Nursery Road Car Park, which you'll see, and that serves Central Avenue. one of the challenges in Central West Pritchard is demand capacity. What we've done is we have provided EV chargers in all the BP Pulse scheme for all the ones that qualify. So if you think of it geographically, the one we delivered at Gamsden Community Hall was because it was close to the A52, and it's usually trunk roads for that the qualifying criteria for that. So we were very early into the market, and we were very successful in delivering those. So all of our public sector car parks, all of our public car parks that have been able to qualify for that grant have been installed. What we're now doing, when I mentioned Zest, is looking at other ones that they're more commercial entities that are looking at doing it from the private sector. So I'd be looking at the car parks that are not within the current remit and seeing if they can get it. It does largely require the DNO, so the district network operator, because what we're having with this, it's a very complicated, because we're not just an island, we're a part of a wider network, and the grid is trying to manage supply and the demand levels, because that's increasing ever more as people transition to electricity. So they're having to try and manage that supply and where that goes, and they're large infrastructure projects. So we are continuing to work with funding and grants and trying to identify car parks we can put in, and that's some of the Zest work that follows on from the BP Chargemaster work.
And my final one, not expecting to kind of have the answer now, or it's just around that with the housing developments and offset, the biodiversity offset that they have to do, and the change in policy. Is there anything often you see with a lot of these schemes is that once the development's got, say, 50% or nearly completion, that then they kind of develop those schemes to then put the offset in? Is there any way that we can influence them to bring them kind of more, say, online, but being developed sooner in the development of the housing development, from the actual beginning, so the trees and everything like that can kind of take, because you mentioned about, like with trees, that it takes 5 years for them to get in, and sometimes these developments are 10 years in the making. So at least like this biodiverse site is then is established halfway through the scheme. Is there anything that around that?
Yeah, so our senior ecologist has been working really hard. So for new developments, they're going to have to present to provide 10% biodiversity net gain. So what happens is when a developer applies for planning permission, they'll have an ecology assessment of that site, and then they have to provide 10% in addition to that site for when it's fully developed. So we have that baseline data of what that site has presented and then how that's delivered. I don't know if we can condition at what phase that they provide that throughout that development life cycle, but it's something that the guidance has been developed all the time at the moment with my colleague Paul, in terms of how that's going to be delivered. And we are, because there will be credits, so they can deliver that on site or they can deliver that off site. And what's really important for us is that for people that are providing that biodiversity net gain, that they're doing within the borough or within that site where possible. So that's the challenge. That's what we're working at the moment. Because there's some sites that wouldn't be able to deliver it on site. It's about how they deliver it off site as well. So it's very much emerging. But I'll ask him that question, and I'll provide guidance if he can say at what point are the triggers for when they've got to provide that offsetting, and is it at what phase in the development?
Thank, because it's very much like making sure that the developers are getting in the planning permissions for those schemes and that kind of thing earlier, and just not kind of sitting on them and it's not just as the development grows and that grows. It'd be good if they all come kind of at an earlier phase, that then once they go off site at the end of their development, like 10-year kind of cycle as I use an example, that all the biodiversity is there and established.
Yeah, and it just on that, the biodiversity, it's for 30 years. So what we will be doing is we will be That's why we've taken on another person, because the duty is that they'll provide 10% biodiversity net gain on that site, and it will be monitored for 30 years. So in terms of, we have some trees, in terms of, say, about 1/3 of trees that are planted die, so they'll have to replace them as a part of that biodiversity net gain, so that it will be that increase over a 30-year period. So it's quite an undertaking in terms of the work that we're going to have to do on that.
Councillor Pretty.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few more questions. You've been incredibly patient and you've answered everybody's questions. Councillor Plant mentioned about the housing providers and Metropolitan Housing being one of our largest providers. And I think in one of the slides it's mentioned about using some funding towards it installing solar panels. Now, I know that Metropolitan Housing is only one of the providers and only Eastleigh was mentioned in the slides. The question I have is, what about the other providers? Have they come up with a plan, an audit, a carbon management plan? And also, as council, can we, probably enforce is not the right word, but can we put pressure on them to provide us with their plan for the upcoming year and what they are doing to for decarbonization and to achieve to achieve the vision that we have as a council? So that was my first question. I've got two more questions, but I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, it's certainly a question that I can take away in terms of a request to understand all of the housing providers that have a footprint within Rushcliffe and their decarbonisation plans. We can certainly request that information. I think I'll be able to speak to our strategic housing colleagues who can request their plans, and it might be something that we want to look at in detail in the future. Thank you.
My second question was, again, in one of the slides and in the report, there's something mentioned about the Codgrave swimming pool and how we are replacing the gas boiler system. How many other pools do we have in the borough which actually use the gas boiler system? And are there any plans to replace them with the air source heat pump alternative in the next few years?
So we have 5 leisure centres within the borough. Right? Yeah. 5 leisure centres within the borough, and Codgrave will be the first. It's a relatively new technology. It's a very big engineering exercise. The recent development at Bingham Leisure Centre is a gas boiler, but it's 82% more efficient than a traditional leisure centre. So that has got a huge amount of green technology built into it. But it's, as these things emerge within the market, this will be a package plant. So it's like a shipping container which will sit on the edge of the development site, and that is just a new technology that's coming. So that's the first one, but it will be as we transition and look at our other buildings how we deliver that as well.
Thank you. My third question is about when we were talking about education, has the thought been given about working with the county council and approaching especially secondary schools about the council's vision, about recycling, waste management, reducing carbon emissions, etc.?
There are no specific project plans in terms of that education at this present moment in time, but we're keen to work with as many partners as possible. What I would say though is that we find the young generation in school, they're so aware and engaged and active within this area in terms of and I have a keen understanding of climate change, and they're doing a lot of works within education. I know from my own experience, my own child comes home and tells me all of the conserving water, turning off lights and that as well. So it's quite embedded within education at the moment. But it is something that we're keen to do. We're keen to educate and work with as many partners as possible. We haven't any specific plans yet because we've been really focused on looking at our own infrastructure at this present moment in time.
Thank you. And my final one. There's lots of targets that the council has. For example, transition to for the fleet to HVO, and the identification of the 46 hectares site once the report goes to the cabinet. Now, as a community scrutiny group, how do we get the updates? Would you send us a report with where we are with those targets, or is there scope of coming back later on in the year to check what is the progress that we're making?
Sorry. Yeah, so we have an annual scrutiny. So this is the annual scrutiny in terms of performance. I would say that we have to bear in mind some of these projects are quite long, and they span multi-year projects. In terms of the leisure centre projects have spanned multi-years. So we feel that we've got that balance with an annual scrutiny right. We are available to answer any members' questions in relation to any aspect or any project that we've got underway. So it's right and appropriate to ask us questions if there's a particular project that people threw out in the intervening period. We try to be as transparent and try to send out as much information as we can in terms of projects as well. So we're hoping to be in a position to be able to announce some further funding in coming weeks about additional funding in, for example, Cochrane Leisure Centre. So we hope that members feel that if they want to ask us any questions, that we are able to answer them throughout the course of the year, in addition to the annual scrutiny.
Thank you so much, and for your presentation, for your patience. Thank you.
Yeah, just to reiterate, it is around this time of the year, like every March, that this comes back to scrutiny. It certainly has since I've been chairing community scrutiny and been a part of community scrutiny. So it is a regular thing since when it was cabinet agreed to with the target to become carbon neutral by 2030. Just to reiterate. Councillor Matthews, I've got you next, and then we'll go to one more.
Thank you, Chair. This may be something that you could answer really quickly, or you might need to go away and answer it. But I was just interested, particularly in relation to the electric vehicle charging points that we've put in, just looking at the costings for those. Are you able to tell us what the usage rates are on those charging vehicles? Obviously, a lot more people are buying electric vehicles nowadays, or hybrids, etc. And we are charging for that usage. So what is the return? Because obviously we aren't just here to spend the public money that we bring in through council tax, but we're actually trying to make sure that it's spent wisely and it subsidises the green agenda that you're trying to achieve. So have you got any figures on the cost benefit, if you like, of putting in those charging points for us? Thank you.
Yeah, so 2 points. I will have to take away and ask in terms of partners, in terms of BP Pulse, if they have got users data, which would be quite interesting. Anecdotally, I can tell you that every time I go to Rushcliffe Country Park, there seems to be 2 vehicles parked up in the 2 bays that we've created there over the last 24 months. We don't receive any funding for that. It was done as a partnership between the provider, which is Pulse BP Charge Master. So we received grants for all of those the infrastructure that we've currently got in, and they put that infrastructure in, and then they received the funding for people who are using it. Darragh, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, correct. Basically, when we had the big rollout, as Derek mentioned earlier, we were quite successful, getting a lot of money coming in. But that was funding for a number of the car parks, not West Bishop, not Bingham. But we are basically a host. So we got the funding in for the benefit of people being able to use our car parks parked there with electric vehicles. But actually, any income, we don't see any income from it. There's no cost to us now. So basically, we're just a host side. BP Pulse have a massive national scheme with cards and stuff. So they would have all the numbers and stuff. We can try and get the numbers if we can, but ultimately it's not something we monitor.
Yeah.
Just to follow up from that, if I can. So just so I get this right. So we've put in the infrastructure, or got the grants for the infrastructure to be put in, So a private company is then making them any money from that revenue, and we get absolutely nothing back.
Yeah, but it didn't cost us any money to put that infrastructure in.
But if we're putting these into our car parking areas, we've got companies that are effectively making money from our spaces that we would otherwise be charging for. Is that correct?
They have to charge. So in the car parks where there's a charge levied, for example, Rushcliffe Country Park, they have to have a pay and display ticket.
Councillor Billing.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all of your brilliantly detailed responses. It's kind of a follow-up on the car park thing. Are you looking at the villages and towns across Rushcliffe? So can parishes come forward and say, we think we've identified a site? Would you be interested?
So with the current funding that was available through that scheme, we've exhausted all the sites that would meet the criteria. So to give an example, Gresham Sports Park has got 2 EV chargers that was put at the entrance of that site, and that's because Wilford Lane is an A road, and it was that proximity and about people using it in terms of the mapping. This is what my colleague Ed is working with CEST to identify again. They will be identifying the ones that will provide the most amount of opportunity for people using electric vehicles and people filling them up. So it'll always be to a point, if it's a commercial entity, they will always be looking at the most amount of passerbys and users, and that's why you'll see them springing up on motorway service stations and that, because people are doing it because it's on a national circuit. So people, as they map their journey, they'll be looking for the EV charging points. The further you get away from scales of economy, the harder it will be. So it's always going to be the same issue in terms of the rural hamlet in rural Rushcliffe. It's going to be harder to find a provider to put the infrastructure. So this is where it'll be coming, that'll need to be subsidised, or that's where they won't be as keen to put it in via grant. So you'd have to kind of say that this is a provision that's needed for that area, and that will be, I'm sure that grants will become available between now and 2050 because of people's need to transition to alternative fuels.
Just in defence of places like Eastleigh and Bingham, they're not hamlets.
Yeah.
It was really kind of to drive traffic into those centres to basically help the local businesses and economies there. Because if people think, well, I can actually drive, then I can top up while I'm doing my shopping there, rather than going into West Bridgeford to Loughborough or wherever. So I wasn't thinking of that funding round that's already been exhausted in the next wave. Are you actually considering them?
Derek, it's also just worth pointing out when we did apply for the funding, we did put Eastleigh and Bingham both actually qualified in the fact that the location to the A46 or the A52. But actually, once the site assessments were done, they weren't deemed suitable to put charging in at that time, and that was for a number of reasons. I'm not an expert on it, but I understand that they don't like a lot of fencing around the car park, so Bingham potentially fenced in. There needs to be obviously an adequate power supply, etc. So Eastleigh and Bingham we did put forward as car parks as well, but unfortunately they qualified for the funding, but actually once the site assessment was done, they weren't able to do it.
And the good news, since that time, we have successfully managed to put in charging points at Bingham Arena. So there are charging points in Bingham. I would love to be able to say tomorrow that we've got opportunities to get funding for Ruddington, for Eastleigh, for all of those other areas that don't have that. Another challenge and another project we're looking at is domestic people, particularly in West Pritchard, where we have houses in terms of they don't have front drives or that, so that they have on-street charging points. So that's a project that people are looking at about how that can be delivered as well. So there are a number of lines of inquiries and projects that we're keen to get, and we're keen to work with any partner to lever that in so that we can deliver those as a benefit. That's part of the challenges of people that don't have drives is how you get that power supply from a domestic dwelling to the house and the footpath. So and then ensuring that they've got a parking space outside of their their property. So it's a challenge. So there are a number of challenges as we evolve through this. It depends how we do it. And again, the electrical supply is a really important one, because if the DNO hasn't got the power within the grid to be able to provide that, then it just fails on that criteria. But it is something that is constantly evolving and we're constantly working on.
Unless we've got any other questions, I shall now move to just to wrap up on this item. Just to, as we are often asked, is to look at the recommendations that we've been given, is to consider the progress to date and the adopted carbon management action plan, and contributes towards the emerging carbon actions for 2024-25. So I think we've met those with all the questions, and that. So if we can just have a show of hands that we've done those recommendations tonight, please, Councillor. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Derek, for your presentation, and then answering all the questions and all the additional tasks that you've now got to find the information for us. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you. Right, moving on to item 5 is the streetwise update, and I'll pass over to Darryl just to start us off.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm mindful that we spent a lot of time talking about really important subjects, so I'm not planning to go through the whole of the report line by line, but I just wanted to sort of, and hopefully you've had time to read the report. I just really wanted to point out, obviously I come to Community Scrutiny Group as my role as service manager to support the Chair. Streetwise also sits within my area. Luke is going to run through a presentation in a minute, but we were really pleased to appoint Luke just over a year ago to be Streetwise manager down at Bingham. The report basically was to give members a bit of an update on where we've been with Streetwise since September 22, when it came back in-house, once it was insourced. The report is quite high level. Hopefully it's covered why it came back. What we now want to focus on, what our main focus is on Streetwise, some of the work we did around restructuring, there's some performance data in there, there's some finance data in there, and then also sort of a bit of a hint about what we want to do moving forward. There's going to be a lot more detail from Luke and the presentation, which we will, mindful of time, we'll try and keep as short as possible, because I'm sure that a lot of you have had involvement with Streetwise over the last 18 months since it's been back now, so I'm sure there will be some questions. So I will hand over to Luke, and then hopefully we will be able to answer most of the questions.
Good evening all. My name is Luke Colaluca, lead specialist at Streetwise. I have a 15-minute presentation just to provide an update on the service area. So I think it's fair to say over the last 18 months there's been some significant changes. As Darryl said, I started in January 2023, and for the first sort of 3 to 4 months I was busy advertising, interviewing, recruiting and appointing team leaders, coordinators into the new management structure under Streetwise, under Rushcliffe. I think we've got a really nice blend of staff that were previously involved in Streetwise, as well as new employees that we've appointed externally. Our main sort of starting point was to review the existing business and the existing contracts, to go out and meet customers to gain feedback on Streetwise, what we did well, but more importantly, the areas that we could potentially improve on. That was a really useful exercise, and it kind of led us on to the scheduling, which the ones we inherited were okay, but they needed updating to become more current, and they definitely needed to be more digitally savvy, and that's an area that we've really been trying to focus on. After reviewing the scheduling, I think that helped the planning of work in advance, and going back to the start of the role, it seemed as though on a daily basis we were kind of caught off guard, and we were more sort of reactive rather than proactive, and that seems to have settled down. Still work to be done, as is inconsistency and the quality of work, and like the scheduling, that's going to require constant reviewing to make sure that we move forwards. And I think embracing technology is obviously really important. We need to be more digitally savvy, and there's some examples in the presentation which has helped streamline our operations and hopefully help us become a bit more efficient. One of the main focuses was health and safety. Clearly, Streetwise conduct a number of high-risk activities across the borough, whether that's climbing trees, using handheld equipment, ride-on mowers, etc. We felt we needed a sort of a staple of golden health and safety rules for the staff to follow, and that's become part of our day-to-day working practices. We've invested in the depot itself, particularly in a new pedestrian walkway and zebra crossing for help transition in and around the depot. If you can appreciate sort of 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, 44 members of staff coming into the building, 25 to 30 vehicles potentially reversing out, there's obviously a bit of a risk there that we needed to reduce. We've implemented a new induction and onboarding process for all staff, and I think that's really helped us sort of embrace and reinforce the Rushcliffe way. We've refreshed all toolbox talks, which is really important, as is the regular staff briefings. That helps us set the pace, communicate any change, but probably most importantly, to gain feedback from the frontline staff. They're obviously out and about in the borough, and that communication needs to be a two-way process. We've updated all risk assessments, obviously to go in the Rushcliffe format, and we've created a competency matrix across the 3 different departments to make sure that we can keep on top of any training that's due or looming. Investment in training has been significant. If we were to go external for the training, to a training provider per individual, it can be quite expensive. So we actually invested in 4 members of staff to complete the trainer qualification in ride-on mowers and handheld equipment. And that was really important for us to be able to offer the training to existing employees, but also provide refresher training. So that gives us the autonomy and control to be able to deliver that in-house rather than going external. So that will be a benefit in the years to come. And we've also invested quite heavily in machinery and equipment, and we've picked up some additional costs this year because we don't want any of that equipment or machinery or vehicles leaving the depot if there's any defects or if they're not fit for use. And we've also implemented a new electronic driver compliance check online. So that's moved us away from the old sort of paper copy, which we would ask each driver to complete and fill in every 3 months, and then it go back to the office and then it be uploaded. This system does it automatically, which is obviously a lot easier and quicker for us to manage, and we get notified if there's any sort of points or anything like that that have been on individuals' driving licenses. Depot developments, we've been really lucky with the investment from Rushcliffe. We opened our new open plan office back in February last year. That's been crucial in helping bring the teams together. I think previously they're perhaps guilty of working in silos in the grounds maintenance, cleansing and tree teams, but having an open plan office has helped us sort of communicate better, share best practice and keep our fingers on the pulse. We've also had 2 new meeting rooms and training rooms to obviously help with toolbox talks and staff comms. The biggest benefit for me is working closer with the wider teams across Rushcliffe, so whether that's Derrick and communities or the support systems, HR, finance, ICT, that's been a huge benefit to us. And obviously Streetwise Unit 10 depot is used as sort of an emergency, used for emergency events. So whilst, for example, Storm Babette or Storm Henk, whilst the sandbags are being loaded downstairs and being driven across the borough, we can be having the staff meetings, dialing into any important calls to provide updates to the frontline staff. And we've also installed a new shower room, which obviously is really important for staff welfare. Along with Rushcliffe's new website last year, that gave us the opportunity to kind of create a one-stop shop for all Streetwise related services. We removed the old Streetwise number and the old Streetwise website because there was obviously coming from different requests coming in from different areas. So it now comes through to the contact centre for telephone calls, and with regards to online and being able to report a problem, if a resident reports a problem with a bin, tree, grass cutting, etc., it pulls through to one CRM system, which helps us sort of manage our daily workflow as well as the standard schedules. We can then prioritise anything that comes in, and it helps us keep on top of information that's coming in from residents. We've had a big push on and created a 6-monthly splitter cleansing programme. So this work is typically done first thing on a Saturday morning when there's reduced traffic, and that involves us removing weeds, removing debris, sending a sweep around, and it gives a big, it's made a big difference when you sat at traffic lights and roundabouts, etc. And that will be ongoing for us to manage going forwards. Another really successful initiative was the Chewing Gum Task Force, where we were successful last year in our bid with Keep Britain Tidy and the Chewing Gum Task Force, and we received the full £25,000 available to remove gums off our streets. The focus of our bid was town centres. We were able to purchase 3 fully electric chewing gum removal machines, as well as 3 additional batteries. And the deadline for this year's submission is next week, and we're ready to press the button on the submission for this year because we'd like to go again. So fingers crossed. Onto high-speed roads. This one's obviously a difficult one. We can't just go onto the A46 or the A52 to litter pick when it's open. So we do have to work in partnership with external bodies and jump on road closures where possible. So last year we did a couple of overnights on the A52 at Strugglethorpe. Earlier this year we did 2 nights on the A52 Bingham closure. Something we want to do more of and we're aware of, but it does have its challenges, obviously. Rushcliffe Litter Champions, this is something that we are really proud of and we want to continue to grow and grow and grow. This is working with any sort of community groups, schools, brownies, cub groups. We provide the litter pickers, the bin bags, the gloves. We'll collect the litter afterwards. This is so important and we're so grateful for the volunteers that do participate in this. And this is something that obviously we want to continue to grow and grow over the coming months and years. We've also just purchased 5 2-minute litter picking stations. So the aim of this station is residents can walk up to the station, grab a litter picker, all the equipment, etc., and complete a litter pick. We purchased 5 through UK SPF funding, and it's in partnership with the 2-Minute Foundation. We've got trials taking place in Ruddington, Radcliffe-on-Trent, and Bingham, and it'll be really useful to see how that initiative delivers. We thought it would be useful to sort of collect some key stats with the equipment that was going out. So we've asked for some very basic data at the sort of February, March time last year, number of bags that we've collected, how many volunteers have participated, as well as how many hours it took. And I think whilst they're the figures that we only know about, there's obviously a lot more outside of that, but we felt we needed some metrics to be able to collate. And in terms of grounds maintenance highlights, anything from summer, winter planting, sports pitch maintenance, grass cutting, shrub works, line marking, goal mouth renovations. And I think the key to grounds maintenance is the constant review of scheduling and challenging if it's always been done a certain way. For example, using a ride-on mower to cut a football pitch. Clearly, it's a lot quicker and easier for a tractor to make that cut if we can get it on there. So that then obviously has a knock-on effect in freeing up staffing time to be used elsewhere. So that's an ongoing piece. We've got over 30 no-mow sites across Rushcliffe, and we also support Rushcliffe Oaks and the external areas there. We've recently taken on Bingham Marina's external areas as well, because that's now come to the been open 12 months, and we've picked up additional contracts for 2024. So I'm really pleased with the direction that grounds maintenance is going in. And in terms of the tree team highlights, we've actually gone from 2 teams of 3 to 1 team of 4. Very competitive market, and we have lost stage 1 climbers into the private sector. What that has allowed us to do is focus on Rushcliffe works, so any high priority tree works, and particularly land drainage, which is really important for making sure that we are cutting vegetation, clearing waterways, and obviously clearing grates to reduce the risk of flooding. So prior to starting at Streetwise, obviously I was aware of the 3 different departments, but the one thing I'm really sort of proud of is the kind of the reactive side of Streetwise, and that could be anything from delivering 1,000 sandbags when Storm Babette hits, and they're going out across the whole of Rushcliffe, whether it's a paint spill in Tollerton or an urgent tree that needs removing, obscene graffiti, fly tips, winter gritting. We're often the sort of first point of contact for reactive works, and the team are always happy to help, which I think is really encouraging. And that's something that we wanted to really try and promote in staff matters and councillor connections sort of internally, because there's a lot of work that goes on across the three teams across the borough that perhaps people aren't aware of. So it's really important to try and raise the profile of Streetwise and raise awareness. We also had really positive staff survey results at the back end of last year. 100% of staff would tell people it's a good place to work. 95% of staff had face-to-face meetings in the last 3 months, which I think is really important. 95% of staff are confident in the management of the service area. Clearly room for improvement there. 84% of staff believe we managed change effectively. And I think, again, the one point I'd like to get across this evening is it wasn't just about the transfer in September 2022. You could be forgiven for thinking there may be some resistance there from the frontline staff that have been doing a job a certain way for the last 10, 15, 20 years. But I'm really pleased to report that everyone's really bought into the direction that we're trying to go in, and are open to change. And I think that's credit to the frontline staff. We also had really good peer review feedback from the panel that completed the peer review. They stated that this was the cleanest borough that they've visited. So that was really nice feedback to be able to feedback to the team, and in particular, the street cleansing side. So looking ahead, continue to focus on Rushcliffe as an area. And we're not interested in going further afield. Want it to benefit Rushcliffe. Continue to build on strong relationships that we have, both existing as well as new ones. Develop a marketing and sales strategy to underpin the business plan and to better cross-sell our services, which is something that we've been doing certainly the last 12 months. We have purchased 2 new road sweepers. The large sweeper is actually arriving the end of this month, and the medium sweeper is arriving at some stage in May this year. And that's led us to a full review of the sweeper schedule. And I think that's something that we should be displaying online so that residents can see what's due over the coming sort of 4 weeks, to see what road's next or when they're next. I think that's really important. As I said, we have picked up some considerable cost this year in getting machinery and fleet up to full working order. So going forward, there'll be a greater focus on cost reduction. And I'd also really like to further explore apprenticeship options across Streetwise. We have one business support apprentice who started with us in October, and Evelyn's been a fantastic addition to the team, and it's one that we'd like to, as I say, look to build on across the Streetwise business. So these core principles were set, I think, in February 2022 as part of the option for Streetwise coming back under Rushcliffe. There's 9 principles on the left-hand side, and I think we've made good progress against all the 9 principles. I put some supporting evidence on the right-hand side. There's a lot of work gone up until this point. We're absolutely not perfect, and we're not the finished article, but there's definitely a commitment there from all of us at Streetwise to continue to move forward. So thank you for listening. I'm happy to take any questions.
So we've got any questions? Otherwise, I've got some that I've just jotted down. Just with the new website and everything, has that been kind of put through to the parish councils through the forums and that to try and like encourage them to go through that rather than necessarily emailing like yourself?
Yeah, it's something the report a problem and it going through the website. Obviously it can be circumnavigated, and if it does come direct to us, we log it as an ESP, is what we'd call it. But the more people that go straight through ESB, the better, because sometimes it can get lost if it's coming through through other mechanisms. But we have been and attended the parish forums, presented at the annual parish conference, and that's something that we want to be at those events to make sure that we're on hand to talk to any parishes, any councillors, etc. And I think that's really important that we are there to be available, really.
Just you said about the litter groups and that initiative and the other with the boards and that where people can go and do. Is there kind of advertising that with the communication, the comms team and that with getting that, because I wasn't aware about that kind of thing. I knew where I'd been a part of a local litter pick and had arranged with Streetwise we'd do it, and then they would go and collect the bags from what we collected as part of that group, but not knowing kind of the scale that it's now become with getting those groups, and it is a sad kind of thing that those groups have to go out and do litter picking, but you really should dispose of the litter kind of properly and sensibly, taking it home and disposing it at home. But how do kind of people find out to participate in those, or community groups or schools and that kind of thing as well to encourage?
Yeah, I think we've done a fair bit of PR on it, but we can always do more. We're obviously linking in with the Great British Spring Clean at the minute with the litter picks that are taking place. And obviously there's some questions for Derek about education. We're really pleased that Rebecca and Evelyn went into a school in Ruddington last week to talk about the benefits of recycling and don't be a litter bug, and that was aimed at primary school assembly. We'd like to take that obviously to more schools. I think there's a second piece going into secondary schools and talking about graffiti and particularly tagging and what the knock-on effect to residents and the cost to the council really in removing that. So there's definitely more that we can be doing, and we're keen to do it.
And just got one final is, as we're probably all aware, it's been quite wet outside recently. Has that had any great effect on the kind of getting the pictures ready and coming up to like seeding and stuff like that, and how that kind of is going?
Yeah, I wish we could do something about predicting the weather. It would be beneficial. It has had a knock-on effect. We started some grass cutting this week. We're trying to delay it to make hope in the hope that some of these pictures will dry. But yeah, it's as and when we see fit, and I don't think there is a right time at the minute. I'll let you know after the first cut.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. Obviously, scheduling, you cover such a vast remit of different things, and scheduling is always a nightmare and a juggling act. But one thing that I think the public would find really useful, and I would as a councillor, would be being able to access what your scheduling is for things like road sweeping. You mentioned that specifically, drain clearing, because these are the things that really annoy residents. I know people mention it to me all the time about the drains and not being cleaned out, and the roads not being swept as much as they used to be, because people's perception is that these things have been cut back on. And I think Rushcliffe is actually a great place, and things like the main roads can be a proper eyesore in terms of the litter, and I understand the dangers involved in that. But if you could advertise what we do as a borough, and actually have that scheduling visible somewhere on the website, I think that would massively improve public confidence in the service that you offer, and would probably take a load off councillors' queries from their residents. So if that's something we could look to do, that would be really good.
Just Luke, you may have something to add after it. Just to stress, as much as drains are a problem, Streetwise don't empty the drains. So the drainage emptying is county council function, not a Rushcliffe function, because we often we often get, it's a bit like potholes. It's not a Rushcliffe function. I think it's a fair point. Luke mentioned we would like to get the sweeping schedules up on a website so people can see how often we can sweep the roads and stuff like that. I think that's a work in progress, isn't it? And it's something that we're quite keen to do. But yeah, I just want to sort of be clear on the drainage. We do put in extra sweeping resources, particularly at heavy times of the year, generally through sort of November, December. In fact, we started early this year on leaf sweeping. So we do bring in additional resources because some people may complain that potentially the drains are clogged up with leaves. So yeah, so we basically do publicise quite a lot. We do quite a lot of work with the town and parish councils about leaf sweeping as well. So I don't know if you've got anything else you want to add, Luke.
No, just that the more we can get online, not obviously schedules are subject to change, such as weather, etc. But I think it helps raise awareness of what we're doing. So definitely,
just sort of an indicative schedule, I think, would be really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And also, just if I may, the groups, the litter picking groups, I know everybody's mentioned those. Is there any way of getting to the council, if nobody else, a list of the groups that you do work with at the moment, so that if there are them that we don't realise as councillors are in our particular areas, we can join up and link in with them, make sure they are actually providing you the information that you need.
Yes, not a problem.
We can take that away as an action, Emma, and then we can share it with the group, but probably wider with the councillors as well.
Councillor Pratt.
Thank you, Luke, for your presentation. I completely agree about the responsive side of Streetwise, especially during Storm Babbitt and the sandbags delivered. So thank you for that. A couple of questions. Are there any plans for more litter picking boards? Because there are 3 trial sites at the minute. And I'm asking it purely from my ward perspective. And Councillor Billion is also nodding his head there, because obviously we have new estates in Edwalton, in Eastleigh, and that a lot of them are not yet covered by Streetwise because they're still with the developers, and littering is often an issue. So are there any plans for that? And the second question, I don't know how to frame this question. Does Streetwise also contract outside the council with the management companies? Because often I've heard that you would do work for management companies, and often residents would come, oh, Streetwise has not done this or not done that. But then I realize it's the management company who you're contracting with. So in those circumstances, how do we approach Streetwise? Would it be via the residents? Sorry, would it be via the council, or would it via the management company?
We do work outside of obviously Rushcliffe Borough Council work. Obviously, before we take on any sort of contracts, we want to make sure we can deliver it and not at the expense of Rushcliffe works. But obviously, we can be contacted through Rushcliffe. There's been a few queries over management companies, and I think there's a wider piece taking place in a different department of Rushcliffe. But we're always happy to have a conversation about taking on additional work. We'd need to understand the frequency and the areas and request maps and stuff. But yeah, we'd never turn down the opportunity to look at it and quote. With regards to the litter picking boards, literally hot off the press, Ruddington's has gone in first. We're hoping it works well. There's a slight concern that we might turn up next week and all the litter pickers have gone, and we need to replace them. But I think we can't just do the same old. We've got to try new initiatives, and I think that's really important. So I think there's 4 of the 5 boards allocated, but we plan to use them to sort of rotate around any hotspots, etc. So happily work with you and setting one up in Edwalton. That's not a problem.
I think the other thing on the management companies, and correct me if I'm wrong, Luke, is at the moment we are not working on behalf of any management companies. So that if there's an impression that Streetwise aren't doing the work, it's the wrong impression, because we're not working on behalf of any management companies.
Councillor Fletcher, I've got you.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. Going back to the flooding, firstly, I'd like to highly commend the operatives for the work that they did getting these sandbags out. It was amazing. We had residents asking us to thank you for delivering sandbags at 10:30 at night on a weekend. It was absolutely brilliant. My question is, I think one of the problems that Streetwise might have had during those periods, because of flooded roads and they're having to go back to Bingham, especially from places like Ruddington, Eastleigh, Goton, could there be some sort of store, say at the country park, that could help distribute this side of the borough more quickly?
Yeah, that's actually one of the lessons learned from Staunton Babette and having these community stores with sandbags, where we obviously have the same issues with travelling from Bingham. If the road network is sort of compromised, we have our challenges getting the sandbags to different parts of the borough. So it's really important that we work with those community stores and who's responsible for them to help assist where we can, because the access to those community stores should be a lot quicker than obviously us loading at Bingham and then allocating out across the borough. So yeah, that's been discussed off the last batch of flooding.
We've also worked, so for instance, I know for instance Gotham, which does suffer from flooding, not all the time, but when it does rain, Gotham is particularly bad in some areas. That we've worked with the local parish council there, and they have their own flood resilience group and store. So that actually means, as Luke said, they can get there 10 times quicker than we can, particularly when the A52 was that deep during one of the last storms. The other thing I would just mention to councillors, and it's something we do try and get out to the residents as best we can, it is down to residents as well to sort of take some action as well. So it's fantastic feedback that we got out there at 10:30, and we appreciate not everyone can do it, but we are trying to sort of say to residents there is a responsibility as well. If you know that it's going to be bad weather and you do potentially get flooded, a few days before, pop down to John A. Stevens or wherever and just pick up some sandbags yourself, because we do have a sandbag policy and we'll always do it on priority. So is the resident vulnerable? Are they elderly? Have they got any disabilities? Are they imminently about to be flooded? Because quite often we'll get people phone and say there's water in my kitchen. Can we have some sandbags? Well, the damage is done then. The sandbags won't stop it. So we don't like to let people down, but we'd always say to members, please urge your residents as well to help themselves sometimes.
Councillor Billy.
Thank you. This may be one of those potholes versus the county kind of thing. When we're talking about no-mow areas, is there the Lenksman scheme? Is that a county scheme or county? Is there an equivalent, or would it be feasible to introduce something like that so that parish councils can take responsibility of areas that are currently under the borough? Because particularly in Eastleigh, we have 4 different regimes of cutting, and my inbox is full of people saying all kinds of things that are not very nice about your team. When it's not your team, it's the county or it's a private company, and we're trying to promote a unified approach across the ward, so that wherever it comes from, whether it's your responsibility, we can take some of it for you. So we'd just like to, how do we go about that, basically?
Yeah, that's definitely one I can take away to see if there's a scheme that we could look to develop. Obviously, on our visits out to different parishes, each seems to do it their own way. It might be a local farmer, it might be local landowner. We do some of it. Thea do some of it. It's quite quite difficult to decipher, and I fully understand where you're coming from. It's often Streetwise get the blame, and actually we have to decipher through maps, etc. that it's not our area. So it is really confusing. That's probably one area that I've really struggled with, being new to Streetwise, that there's not like a one-size-fits-all map that you pull out and you can determine who's responsible for what immediately. But it's one I can take away with, and if we can make life easier going forwards, then we're all for that.
My other question was about education. Do you have material, or are you looking to produce materials that it's been mentioned across the other way, that we can take to secondary and primary schools? Because I think pester power is perfect, and if we can get the children to take it home to parents, so it may not be material that is aimed at the children, but for the children to take home and give to mum and dad. And also, we all do probably ward surgeries. Do you have material or people that might like to come along on a rota basis and sit with us?
We are more than happy to be visible, and I think we've been at face-to-face to parishes, but we've also gone to parish meetings. That's part of our role, promoting what we do. From my experience of just going into the schools, it seems as though a lot of schools have gone to sort of newsletters now, so it's providing electronic information about litter picking and the stuff we do. So we don't have as much printed material as we used to. If there's a request for it, we're happy to do that. But yeah, digital's the way forward. Yeah, well, thank you.
If that could be shared with all councillors and that, because I think I'll be very keen, because I've had primary schools about green initiatives, that kind of thing as well. Yeah,
I think obviously it's in partnership with R2Go as well for the household collections. So yeah, if there's something new that we could knock up and work across the different departments, then yeah, that'd be great.
Councillor Plant, you're next on my list.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I'd like to say well done to Luke and to Darryl, really, in terms of managing the transition back in-house. I can never really understand the rationale behind it actually going to arm's length, or whatever it was called 10 or 12 years ago, but I'm really pleased that it's back in-house, and also that the focus is going to be on Rushcliffe, mainly on Rushcliffe. Obviously, there'll be other, well, they'll be making, obviously trying to increase the revenue as well, but that the focus is on Rushcliffe is the important thing. So just a couple of questions. Going back to the report, the first one is that I mean, it's been sort of nearly 18 months, hasn't it? And there has been savings of, and I'm still not sure what this money actually means, but 0.1 million savings have been made in the first year. One, I'm wondering, you know, how that was made, because in terms of the first year, and you'd obviously have a lot more outlay. That seems quite amazing that you've done that. My other question is going back to the performance indicator. One, I wonder who goes around inspecting these things, and I'm really fascinated that your current performance on dog fouling is 100%. Now, personally, I do have one of the few complaints that I have in my ward is in terms of Bridgewood Park, is that there's a lot of dog fouling going on. So I just can't understand how you've got 100% there and how you get it anyway.
I can probably, Luke can probably jump in afterwards. So in relation to the financial part of the report, I'm just looking at it now. You're correct, and I have had conversations with finance colleagues since 0.1 M is actually £100,000 in our language, I think, is what we discussed the other day. From a finance point of view, it's just the way it's shown in the report. You asked how those savings are made. So basically, when Streetwise Cabinet decided to bring Streetwise back in house, we were tasked with making £200,000 worth of transitional savings over the first 2 years. We've done that through a number of ways. It's probably fair to say with Rushcliffe coming back in house, we probably increased Streetwise buying power. So we have probably a bit more buying power now. It's not a standalone. Whilst it was a Rushcliffe owned company, Streetwise was very much standalone. Oh, that's quite all right. So we've tried to reduce wastage. It's probably fair to say we've took on board a lot of the contract variations and additional work that happens. So when we need to start mowing other areas as they become adopted or whatever, we've probably looked at our capacity and took that on board. Whereas maybe previously Streetwise would have said, well, as part of a contract variation, we would require some more money for that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I've wrote this down before. Yeah, better buying, probably less wastage. Luke's mentioned, for instance, the tree team. We lost 2 members of the tree team. It's a very competitive market. They left because they could get paid a lot more in the private sector with the qualifications. So we reduced that tree team down from 6 to 4 because we felt actually we could still do the work with 4 people. So those 2 vacancies were given up as savings. So yeah, we've achieved the 200,000. In relation to the performance indicators, these are the key performance indicators. There are other performance indicators we monitor. These are the key ones, and these actually get reported nationally into something called waste data flow, which also includes all our recycling rates down at the Eastcroft depot as well. It's fair to say we measure them ourselves. So, but we measure them to a certain standard. So there is an industry national standard that is set aside. So we have one of our managers who will go out, and the bullet is dissected into certain areas. So, and they're called transects. So basically, they won't mark it out with string and stuff, but they will roughly work out a number of transects that they have to check each week or each month. And those transects could be in a park, could be on a pavement, could be on an A road. So we try and get as many different transects as we can, sticking to this guidance that we have to follow. And then we basically walk it and we say, well, how bad is it from a litter point of view? Is it grade A? Is it grade B? Is it grade C? Is it grade D? Grade D is probably what it would look like after a football match. Grade A is really hardly any litter present at all. And that's how we get these percentages of how it's looking. So I think it's fair for me to say we are marking ourselves, but we're marking ourselves to a standard that we have to stick to, which is a national guidance standard. Dog fouling one is simply the areas that we're checking at the moment. We're not finding dog fouling a problem, and I do appreciate what you're saying, because I think, you know, as a dog owner myself, people that let dogs foul is disgusting habit. I think dog fouling is really a very sensitive issue, because if you go home and you've trodden it, or your kids have trodden in it, etc., we get complaints about it. But actually, we get very few complaints about dog fouling, and saying it's a big problem in the borough. So actually, the facts are that when we go and check these areas, we're not finding significant areas of dog fouling. That might well be because some of the transects haven't included maybe a bit of a grassed area at the end of a road where people are regularly letting their dogs go. But actually, generally, if you walk down a pavement or a footpath or a walkway, you don't generally come across dog fouling. That's not to say it doesn't happen, and when it does happen, I appreciate you getting the complaints. I don't know if you've got anything to add on the transects, Luke.
Just if we do get sort of an area where we feel like it's reoccurring, we will obviously notify WISE as well to help with the fixed penalty notices and to monitor that area, as well as our frontline operatives as well.
I mean, I think in terms of Bridgeford Park and Bridgefield, dogs are obviously let off their leads. And to be fair, I mean, when I had my dog, you do stop and have conversations with people. And if you don't keep your eye on the dog, you've not actually noticed that they have, and you're not picking up. So that is obviously going to be happening every now and then. But, you know, it's not a big issue, but I have had a few complaints about that. And the other thing I'd like to say is certainly in terms of where I live, Trent Bridge, well, I forget which ward we're in now. I'm the Trent Bridge councillor, but I don't live in Trent Bridge. But when I walk to West Bridgeford, the Portland Road, Clumber Road, whatever, all those side streets are considerably better than they were over a year ago. There's no doubt about it in terms of litter, in terms of how they look. It's a vast improvement, because there were times when I was quite ashamed, really. I wasn't on the borough then, but so I couldn't complain.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. With the flooding going to get worse, is it possible that Rushcliffe could put on its site anti-flooding products, like you already talked about buying your own sandbags? Well, you can get products to go down the side of the doors to stop the water coming in, sheets of plastic, and then you put the sandbag down to stop it going underneath. Also, there's, I don't know if councillors knows, but you have to have a toilet bung because the water comes up the toilet. So could the council put those sort of products on the site and where the public can purchase them from? Sorry, my voice is going. Thank you.
I'm not an expert on some of the products you mentioned. I am aware that over the last couple of years, we've, because I signed them off, we've literally issued probably well over 100 grants to, which has been some sort of central funding that we've received to those people that are really struggling regularly with flooding. So that is actually, I think the grants are up to £5,000 each. So it involved things such as flood defence or gates or all sorts of stuff as well. I don't think there's any plans for us to actually provide stuff because it's probably there on the market, and then there would be a question about are we selling stuff? Is it correct that the council buys stuff and then sells it to residents? How liable do we come, for instance, if one of the products that we sold didn't work and a house was flooded, etc.? I think there's probably work that we can do on certainly not just the sandbags, but educating residents and some of the things you mentioned. So, are you aware there are other things you can get as well that may well help?
And where you can get them from.
Yeah, happy to take a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other further questions? No? Right. Thank you very much, Luke, for coming this evening and presenting and asking all our, answering all our questions. And thank you very much to everybody at Streetwise for all the hard work that you do around supporting the residents and as what's been alluded in the peer feedback, kind of making it a very clean borough for us all to live in. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I'll take that feedback to the teams. Thank you.
Thank you. Just going on again, like we have to, with our recommendation for this item, it is recommended that Community Scrutiny Group consider the information provided and provide feedback on the overall performance of Streetwise, which I think we all have. So I can just have a show of hands. We all agree we've met that. Thank you very much. Right, just going on to the last item of our agenda is the work programme. So as you might have seen, of course, the actual dates haven't been set for the work programme, but the next meeting of community scrutiny is in July, and that's got the use of community facilities, annual report on scrutiny, and then a work programme update. And then in October, it's got about accessible housing, which that came to corporate overview, and it was felt at corporate overview that it's kind of covering both this scrutiny group and also growth scrutiny group. So the officers are looking at how a joint approach could be met with both scrutiny groups going forward. As yet, that hasn't been decided as the best way forward for everybody's time and officers' time, and also to give adequate time for us to all scrutinise it, because as you can appreciate, having two scrutiny groups together, there'll be a lot of people then wanting to speak, and so that's where it's then how to manage all of and all this kind of stuff. Half, I think, getting half for council. So yeah, it's still, I think it's going on how that can be done at the next corporate overview group meeting, in order to take that item forward. But it was felt that you couldn't really split it to either or community to either or scrutiny group. So that's just to give councillors on this scrutiny group a background on that. And at the moment, which of course can always change when we next go to COG, January and April don't have anything as yet scheduled, but I would presume that April would have the update on the carbon management plan, most probably, as it often is at that time of the year. So if there's any questions or anything on the works programme? Could I have a show of hands to accept that, please? Thank you very much. And that is all the items on tonight's agenda. Just double checking. Yeah. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming along and participating in all the questions and feedback. And have a good evening. I'll close the meeting at 21:09. Thank you.